Mental illness affects 1 in 4 people. That means that the chances are great that you or someone that you love will have to deal with mental illness at some point in your lives. It's not a subject that should be avoided or swept under the rug, but I feel that if we as individuals can educate ourselves and be aware of mental illness, the better off as a society will be. The effects of mental illness on a family can be debilitating and sometimes have devastating consequences. I asked Rod if I could interview author Debbie Nau Redmond because I feel so passionately about this subject. Debbie grew up here in Colorado. Her older brother Ricky was diagnosed with schizophrenia as a young man. Her story is one of love and loyalty, how her family suffered through tragic events that changed their lives forever. And now Debbie is telling her story in her book, Silent Voices, in an effort to bring awareness and to advocate for those families and individuals suffering from mental illness. So, Debbie, thank you for taking the time to sit down with me and talk about your book, Silent Voices. I'm Debbie Redmond.
Yes.
And I was going to ask you, how do you pronounce your maiden name?
Now.
See, I was right.
Yeah, it's
Now.
German.
Thank you. There you go, German. Okay. So I do appreciate you taking the time to talk to me, and I had such a hard time putting your book down when I read it. It was just, I was through it in a couple days. It was awesome.
Thank you very much.
Can I have you just tell me a little bit about your book and the experiences that you and your family went through, just to tell people?
Well, basically the book is about my brother who has schizophrenia, and it's about the journey that I take with him and my family, and what it was like to experience that illness and trying to get him help, to try to understand it, and how it really takes a toll on a family, and how stressful it could be dealing with somebody who's mentally ill. So the book is really about the journey and how it influenced me, and then unfortunately, due to lack of medical help, a bad situation happens due to it.
I gotcha. Okay. I have read the book. I know I don't want to give away too much.
Yeah, gotta read the book.
I know, absolutely. It's definitely worth the read for sure.
Yeah.
So, but I know, just to ask you, I know your family struggled with having your brother at home with you, and you're one of 6 children. So, and you're the youngest, right?
Right. Actually, youngest of 8.
Of 8. Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
And while your brother Ricky was ill, I know he was at home with most of you kids still at home.
Right.
I know there were times when he was at home that he would leave, or that your family, your parents actually had to ask him to leave for your safety.
Right.
How difficult was that to reach that decision that, we love you, Ricky, but we can't have you here,
Well, since I'm not the parent and I can't totally speak for my parents, I could just speak on what I witnessed, but it was the hardest decision I think they ever had to make. But it took 2 years for them to make that decision, because the journey with Ricky took 2 years, and his illness progressed and got worse and worse and worse. And unfortunately, he had acute schizophrenia, which is the worst you could have. So he had very severe symptoms. And it finally gets to a point where, as a parent, it's not just about helping and protecting and doing what you can for your child who's sick. You have to start thinking about the whole family and how it's affecting them and their safety. Right. And it got to the point where they had to think about that first. And they didn't want to ask Ricky to leave, but they had to. They had no choice. He forced them basically back into a corner because he would not go get help and he would not take the medication anymore. Right. So they had to make the decision to keep their other kids protected.
Safe, yeah. As a parent, I can only imagine, how I would never want to be faced with that decision. That's got to be really heartbreaking.
Well, I remember a couple times at night, my dad walking around all night long.
Right, right.
Just pacing, One, worried that Ricky will show back up, or 2, did he make the right decision? What can we do to make this better? And I heard my mom cry many times.
I'm sure.
So it was not a difficult situation by any means.
Right, right.
So, but they did the right thing.
Yes. What do you think might have change that decision, or how do you think your family might have dealt with that had Ricky, how old was he when this all really was occurring?
He got sick. He went into the Navy, and he got sick. He went into the Navy right after high school, so he's 18. And he was in the Navy for about a year when he got home. So he was 19 and a half, I think, when he finally came home.
Okay.
But there's signs of him becoming ill, which we didn't know. We weren't educated. We didn't know at 17.
Right. Okay.
But he got full-blown sick 19 to 20.
Okay. All right. So, and you said this was about a 2.5 year journey?
Yeah, after he came home, it was a 2-year journey.
Okay. How do you think, I mean, that decision to, sometimes have to ask him to leave the house, how do you think that would have changed had he been younger, under 18?
You know, they couldn't.
Right.
He would have had to stay home.
Right.
You know, my parents knew, when they asked him to finally leave the house, at this time he was almost 22. So he was a grown male adult.
Right.
Now, say if he was 13, 14, or younger, no, they would have never asked him to leave the house. And unfortunately, it may have resorted to where maybe us kids would have left and gone and lived with our friends if we had to.
Other members or friends, yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. We're going to talk more about that later.
Okay.
I know that you feel very strongly that when Ricky was younger and in high school, I believe, right, he chose to do recreational drugs, I believe marijuana.
Yeah.
Is there anything else that you know?
I'm pretty sure he tried some acid.
Okay.
And some mushrooms, yeah.
I know you feel very strongly that drug use played a part in bringing out or facilitating his schizophrenia.
Yeah.
Tell me about your reasons behind your opinion for that.
A couple different reasons. Basically, from what I know, from what the doctors told us, the brain is the last to develop in your body. And so your brain isn't completely developed to about age 18 or 19. So when you're doing drugs 15, 16, 17 years of age, you're really affecting the chemical balance of your brain. And that's why it's so important that kids in high school don't do drugs. If you could, if you smoke pot at your 17 when your brain's developing, it could really affect that development.
Right.
Now, once the brain's developed, from what the doctors told us, once the brain's developed after 19 and you have marijuana, it doesn't matter because it's developed. You're done, you're okay.
Right.
But during the precious stages of that final development, and I think unfortunately for Ricky, not only did we have schizophrenia in our family, so he had the predisposition gene for it.
Right.
But I think the drugs triggered the onset of it. And I think the stress of him going into the Navy also caused for it to develop into what it did.
Okay.
So, but medically speaking, you're playing with fire when you're doing drugs in high school. A lot of kids have no problems, but unfortunately for Ricky, I know it affected him because I remember the first time he got stoned, or when he was getting stoned, a couple of his friends made comments that he acted extremely weird, like no other kid had ever acted that they had seen, and they made comments to us about it. Like, God, your brother really got weird or crazy. So I think for him, it just affected him so much differently.
Right.
But I think it's because he had the predisposition for the gene of schizophrenia, and it caused that triggered reaction.
That makes sense.
And so that's when it started to develop.
Right. Okay. Now, talk to me a little bit. I know we were previously talking about the statistics, mental illness, and talking about whether today there are more people that are mentally ill, or is it just being diagnosed more often and recognized sooner? So, share with me your thoughts on that.
Well, let me just give the statistics because there's no medical which way, if it's an increase of population or if it really is an increase of mental illness. But 1 out of 4 people have mental illness severely in their lifetime. That is 1.75 billion people that have mental illness in this world. Currently, at this given moment, 450 million people have mental illness. Now, if you think about that, actually, the last statistics I saw, it's increased to 26.2%. So when you're standing in a grocery store and 3 people are next to you, 1 out of you 4 is going to have mental illness sometime in your life. Now, there's more mental illness than cancer, diabetes, heart disease, MS, MD, and Alzheimer's.
Wow.
But yet it's the number one ignored disease of getting, charities and medical help and government funds and all that. Now, in regards to schizophrenia, there's 51 million people worldwide. It's 1 out of 100 people. Just in America alone, there's 2.7 million people that have schizophrenia.
Wow.
Actually, there's more schizophrenias than a population of North Dakota and Wyoming combined.
Wow.
So when you really think about the statistics and how much more it is than all these other diseases,
Yes.
it's pretty nerve-wracking, but yet nobody will do anything about it. And it's the most ignored, I feel.
Hence the title for your book, right?
Yeah.
Silent Voices. I think that's a great title.
Yeah. Well, thank you.
What do you, in your opinion, what do you think it would take for, is it just raising awareness for mental illness? And, how do we get the government to sit up and take notice and start funding some programs? And I know we have more help now today than we did back, when your family was going through this.
Correct.
Which is good, but we could definitely use way more. So what do you think would be the key to opening that up?
I think there are a lot of things have to take place. One, we got to get government to buy in that there needs to be more programs. Unfortunately, the funds that are cut are usually the mental health field that are cut first and foremost. Just recently, in the last 2 years, it's already been $1 or $2 billion cut in the government funding for mental illness.
Wow.
They're cutting Medicaid, they're cutting programs, which is really sad that, when we do budget cuts, that's the first place we go to cut, considering what the statistics are. Right. Now, what can we do to get it better? I'm not really sure. I think there has to be a lot of things. We got to get more people in the government that understand the seriousness of it. Not cut those budgets. Getting more people aware. I think there's still that social stigma. Ooh, keep it quiet, I don't want to talk about it, nobody tell anybody. And I think we need to approach mental illness as a disease, not a social stigma and not a personality disorder. Because it really is a chemical imbalance of the brain. It is a physical disease or ailment. And so it's trying to teach people to think that way and not think that it's a personality problem and, oh, they'll get over it or let's just ignore it. And I think that it's social stigma, and I think, educating, commercials, more charity programs, more just anything to get that information out there, is a start. But I think we have a long way to go.
It seems to me that there have been a lot more films. Hollywood's produced a lot more films regarding mental illness, and specifically on schizophrenia. I had some notes here. I know everyone's heard of A Beautiful Mind. That was a good movie. The Soloist, which was one of my favorites. There was Benny and June, which I did not know was about schizophrenia. But then when I Googled it, I also found Angel Baby. I don't know.
I haven't heard that one.
I haven't either. The Gingerbread Man.
Haven't heard that one either.
And The Saint of Fort Washington and Dare to Love.
I haven't heard that one either.
Okay. But I was amazed that that seems to be becoming more of a theme.
I hope so, because I know I'm trying to make my book into a movie.
That's
my long-term goal.
Because,
think of technology today in the movies, how they could do hallucinations and in the perspective of, say, Ricky and what he's seen and feeling. And maybe if they had a movie that was more serious like this, people would have a better understanding and respect for the person who is sick and what they're going through. Give it a whole nother perspective. Because A Beautiful Mind and The Soulless and stuff is a really gentle, sweet movie on schizophrenia, and they have special gifts. Where this is really truly about a really bad illness. So I would love to be able to do that.
Yeah, I would love for you to be able to do that.
Because technology would allow it now.
Yeah,
28 years ago, we couldn't make a movie like that. You wouldn't be able to show the hallucinations.
Yeah, that would be a great. I'm on board.
Yeah, we'll try. I'm sending my book to all the screenwriters, so.
I know you're right. I mean, A Beautiful Mind, yeah, it didn't touch on any
Right.
aspect of any violence whatsoever.
Right.
The Soloist, there were some parts of the movie where you
Right.
could tell that he was
Right.
not overly violent, but there was that tendency.
Mm-hmm.
And somewhere I read or heard, it might have been at the end of maybe A Beautiful Mind, maybe, that most schizophrenics are not violent.
Correct.
Do you agree with that?
Yeah, from what I understand and what was told to us, through the doctors and just, asking questions even, throughout my life, most schizophrenics are very loving, gentle people who are scared of society. Ricky was an extreme case. Most schizophrenics don't get as violent as he does.
Okay.
But he had an acute. So when you look at all the symptoms of schizophrenics, most doctors will say, oh, one schizophrenic will have these, one schizophrenic will have these symptoms. Unfortunately, Ricky, if you look at it, had almost all of them, which is really kind of rare.
Okay.
But it can happen. And if you look at the news media today, look at all the stories that are on the news stations. Almost every major murder is somebody who's mentally ill that didn't get the help that they needed.
Right.
And
Tragic.
that's what's disturbing to me is, okay, why does this keep happening? But still, I think the percentage is very low on the people that actually do become violent.
Right. I know we talked about a lot of the homeless population is mentally ill. Maybe schizophrenic, maybe, from the Soloist too, maybe clinically depressed, maybe bipolar, and who knows what other mental illnesses are out there. Because there's not enough government funding and programs out there to help these people, what would be and it's tragic, and a lot of people, I think, tend to say how sad, and but it doesn't really hit home with them. It's not them living out on the street. And unless they do have violent tendencies, or unless they do actually go over the society's line and commit a crime, even a violent crime or a nonviolent crime, then why would the government sit up and take notice? I mean, they're providing, there's shelters, but I understand that most of those shelters are not government funded.
Correct.
So what motivation is there for the government to step in and provide more funding and help for people and families?
The only motivation, they won't have motivation until the society or people speak up and demand to make differences. The voters need to do that. What's interesting, though, is I was talking to a policeman one day downtown about the homeless folks, and I had looked at the statistics, and I believe 75 to 80% of the homeless are mentally ill, and I think 40% of those 80% are schizophrenics.
Wow.
And majority of them don't want to go to shelters, and they don't want the help. They're the ones that live under the bridges and stuff, and that's because they're so scared of society, and they freak out when they go in a room of 100 people with all these beds. They can't live in an environment like that. They can't survive. And when I think of my brother Ricky, he had to be in a little closed-net little area by himself. If we invaded his space, it freaked him out. So I understand why a lot of the homeless schizophrenics don't want the help or don't go to shelters, is because it scares them. And they're not ever going to be able to get the help unless if they get on medication. But unfortunately, I don't know if they don't have family members, they don't have friends. A lot of them that are homeless here in Denver aren't even from Denver, from what the police told me. They don't know where they're from. And so there is no one to give them that help. But I don't know how we could change it. I do believe people make their choices, and they don't want the help. Because the cop was telling me the policemen are always going there offering to take them to the shelters, offering to get them food, and they always turn it down because they're too afraid of society and being in an enclosed environment. But how the government could do that and fix that, I'm not really sure, except build more halfway houses or more shelters that are specifically for schizophrenics, and maybe have their own little room or their little niche where they feel safe and secure. That's what I would like to do, is to build the halfway houses.
And I find that, I think that is a fabulous idea.
But there's not much in Denver or here for them to go to.
Is there anything?
There's a few spots, Fort Logan and a few places to go. And then otherwise it's private hospitals, and they're so expensive. An average person like you and me could never afford them.
Right.
So it's just like, who's at help, you know?
Right. And I still think even the private hospitals still have a hard time, again, getting the funding to be able to allow patients to stay there.
Correct.
If they get them to a minutely stable place, then they're kind of forced to just go ahead and release them.
Right.
I did want to talk about your plans for, housing in a halfway house. I think that's a great idea. At some point in the recent past, I had watched a documentary on TV about families. There were 2 or 3 families that they showcased, and these were families with actually really young children, and for these families, they were all daughters. Right. But I mean very young, like I'm thinking, 8 to 13, 14.
Wow.
And they were struggling with not being able to get the help that they needed at the hospitals, and they were in and out of the hospitals, and it was just heartbreaking to watch these girls, and then also watch what their families were going through.
Right.
And there was one family in particular that had a young daughter and then a younger son. The son was about 2. And this family ended up having to literally have 2 separate households because the daughter was becoming violent and hurting their son. Right. And so they ended up having to have a whole separate apartment that either mom and daughter would live there, and then the father and the son would live in their home. What's your thoughts on that? And is this along the lines of what you were looking towards opening? Would it be for families? Would it be for children? Would it be for, is there a specific?
Well, I would probably, my first thought would be it's for schizophrenics at the beginning stages of the illness. So at first I'd like to focus on, 16 to 22, because I believe in my heart if you could get it at an early stage and teach coping skills and train and have family counseling and support groups and all this stuff to educate them about the illness, how they have to live their life, how they need to take medication, the rate will skyrocket. The percentage rate of them being successful and having a great life is very, very good. So I'd like to focus on that at first, but I also think I need a halfway house for people older who have severe schizophrenia that have absolutely nowhere to go, and they need a shelter, but they have to take the medication to be able to stay there. So there's that type of part. And then I would also like to have another part that's really for any type of mental illness at any age. Right. But so I got these plans. Yes. But I have to start small and big, build up. But my first and foremost is to schizophrenic specifically.
Well, that seems to be a big need, you know. I hadn't thought about, families with children. And I also know from your book and also from some research that schizophrenia doesn't usually manifest until early 20s, right?
Males, it starts anywhere between 16 and 21. Okay. And females tend to be later, like upper 20s, early 30s.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay, I didn't know that.
The symptoms could all be the same, but for some reason it's later for females.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, so, I know that, families with young children that are schizophrenic are probably very rare. But
yes, but the sad part is you're hearing an increase of it.
Right.
In the last, 5 years. And so you need to ask the question as why.
Right.
What's really going on that we're seeing more mental illness in our children? And, not only is it environmental factors and maybe family history, but it makes me kind of question food processing, chemicals around the household. Is any of that playing into anything? I don't know, because it just seems like there's an increase.
Perhaps maybe the silver lining is that if there is an increase in schizophrenia or mental illness in general, I don't know if I want to call this a silver lining because it's kind of heartbreaking, but obviously the more people are going to be aware of it.
Correct.
And then eventually, if nothing else, the government would have to step up and take some notice and provide funding. I just don't see any reason why there would not be more funding available. or why that would be the first place they take funding from.
And that's such a frustration with me. And it doesn't matter what political views you have. It seems like every president, no matter Republican or Democratic, that's the first place they go to cut the budget. And, you know, I know a lot of people are against, you know, government paying for a lot of these programs. But, you know, in reality, these kids are our future generations. And I don't see how people could just say it doesn't matter and let's cut the budget when you have such a high increase and high statistics.
Right.
It's very disturbing to me, but
I agree.
You know, I guess you vote for a person that you know will try to make that better, I guess.
Right.
I don't know.
Absolutely.
It's such a difficult question to
It is difficult.
answer, and there's so many different reasons why things happen, and it's frustrating to me, though.
Yeah. Well, hopefully we can raise a little bit of awareness with our broadcast.
Well, I'm hoping the book will teach people, you know,
Yeah.
about schizophrenia, about what a family endures. You know, maybe teach them a little compassion about mental illness.
Absolutely.
I think that's what we need in society, is a little more compassion.
Definitely.
And understanding for the person who is sick and for the family that's trying to help them.
I agree.
And let's just hope somehow that the government will quit cutting the
A little
budget
bit of
and
notice.
allow Medicaid to step in and help families to afford any type of private
Treatment.
hospitals or facility treatments or whatever that needs to be done.
Right.
So